The intentions of this book are not for you to use this skill to steer others in a sinister or harmful direction, what we refer to as unethical manipulation, but rather to use the techniques you learn here to guide others in a manner that is beneficial to you as well as them. Manipulation is a word that is heavy with connotation because it often is used to refer to negative intentions, but here you will learn how to distinguish ethical acts from unethical ones in order to use your newfound powers for good. Now, if you are like most people, your first question is most likely, what is the point? It is a question you have every right to ask, and frankly, it is the one you should be asking. Why learn how to manipulate others when you can just follow the rules and achieve success the old-fashioned way, right? Well, we hate to break it to you, but men and women have been manipulating others to achieve success for thousands of years. Indeed, we might even make the case that manipulation is the oldest trick in the book. Your parents manipulated you to get you to do the things that they wanted. Your wife, husband, or boss may be manipulating you as we speak. The point here is that despite any connotations that some may have when it comes to the word manipulation, manipulation happens constantly in human social interactions and is considered by some psychologists to be a normal part of human behavior. Human behavior is complex, and manipulation is just another way that how we think and behave as people is not always as straightforward and simple as we like to think. Influencing the actions and perceptions of others can be necessary to help them, meaning that manipulation can be used as a force for the good of yourself and others. Aside from that, a little manipulation may be necessary to get you from point A to point B. The salesman uses manipulation to convince you to buy a product. Television stations use manipulation to convince you to watch a program. The goal is to get you to watch their channel instead of another network's, and they know just how to do it. They show you an enticing image or blare an interesting idea to get your mind working. They might alarm you with a shocking story that they have interpreted for you. These are all forms of influence. What's the point? You are constantly being influenced, and most of the time you are completely unaware. Knowing how to influence others is a useful skill in many industries and an essential one in others. Someone who is able to successfully manipulate others ethically will find success in almost any field. Manipulation is crucial to making deals, negotiating a good price on a product purchased, like a house or a car, and getting what you or what someone else wants effectively, just to point out a few examples. Not knowing how to manipulate puts you at a disadvantage at work and socially. As we have mentioned, people all around you are manipulating in one way or another. Here you will learn the positive ways that you can influence others, all with usable skills that we will equip you with. Before we get into the contents of the book, let us stress here that everyone manipulates. We introduced you to the idea that you may be being manipulated currently without your knowledge. Well, the flip side of this reality is that you are also actively engaged in manipulating others. You manipulate your dog when you reward him with a treat for good behavior or withhold that same treat for a bad one. This reinforcement of a behavior, positively or negatively, is a type of manipulation. Here you will be given many examples of manipulation in order to better understand the different types. Manipulation is often thought of as falling into the realm of dark psychology. As this name suggests, dark psychology is the art of using the psychological aspects of human behavior to influence people, sometimes in ways detrimental to themselves. Dark psychological practices, in this case, manipulation, do not have to be used negatively, as you will see in this book. Most of the ways that we guide the behavior of others involves manipulation of some kind or another. Using the skills of manipulation that you gain here is a means of taking the knowledge and applications of dark psychology and using them for good. The first step to using dark psychology for good is getting a sense of what is actually meant by good. This is the subject of ethics. In this book, we are specifically concerned with ethical manipulation so that this skill can be put to good use. In the first chapter, we will give you a crash course in ethical manipulation so that you are instantly guided in terms of how to use the skills and knowledge you will gain shortly thereafter for positive effect. We will also help you to gain a better understanding of manipulation by introducing you to the different types. You may be surprised to learn that you are already actively engaged in manipulation. You may also find that you already know a little bit about the subject. In the second chapter, we will tackle the subject of unethical manipulation. No, the purpose here is not to introduce you to the subject so that you can make use of it. The truth is that human beings are very vulnerable to suggestion, like other primates, and it is very easy to wander into unethical territory when you are tapping into some of these innate human tendencies. By clearly defining unethical manipulation and clearly establishing a dividing line between it and ethical manipulation, we hope to steer you in the right direction, to use your powers for good, so to speak. The discussion of the subject of unethical manipulation is replete with examples for your edification. You've probably downloaded this book because you intend to use manipulation to great and positive effect at work. In the third chapter, we expand on the manipulation examples that we will introduce you to in the first chapter to give you practical applications. Manipulation is actively used at work, especially in the financial sector. Of course, this is not to suggest that finance guys and gals are a bunch of cheats, but manipulation has great importance here because this is an industry where understanding people and knowing how to interact with them effectively is of the utmost importance. Finance is not the only industry that puts the art of persuasion to good use. Manipulation is also used in the military. Sergeants and officers manipulate those below them, often to create a soldier who knows his or her job and knows his or her place in the grand scheme of things. As you can see, manipulation can be an important tool to create a strong group dynamic. This chapter will give you a deeper understanding of ethical manipulation by introducing you to specific examples of its practical applications. In the fourth chapter, you will prepare your mind to be able to manipulate. This preparation will allow you to take your newfound knowledge of manipulation and turn yourself into an instrument that is able to manipulate others at will. It is not as sinister as it sounds. Think about it. Many books written about success in business or at work are really geared toward teaching you how to manipulate, or to put it nicely, to influence others. Books about winning friends and becoming a better entrepreneur by networking are really about manipulation. When you're done with this chapter, you may find that you are able to look at life and things that you read with an expanded eye. Once you know the ins and outs of manipulation and you have prepared yourself to be able to manipulate, you are ready to actually use this skill. The final chapter will break down for you step by step how you can go about manipulating. By the time you reach this chapter, you may find that you have enough of a grasp to be able to give manipulation a try on your own, but we hope that this chapter will help ensure that you manipulate ethically. We will guide you on this course by breaking down ethical manipulation simply and logically and connecting each step with an example of how you can accomplish it. By the time you are done with the book, you will be fully prepared to use the arts of dark psychology for a not-so-dark purpose. It won't be long before you realize that your wife, your parents, your boss, and your friends have been using these tactics on you for years. We hope you do not hold too much of a grudge against your boss for manipulating you. We are certain that he or she had good intentions, or at least we hope they did. And hey, by the time you reach the end of this book, you will be able to give your boss and the others in your life a taste of their own medicine. Chapter 1. Ethical Manipulation. Persuasion is a general term for the practice of influencing others. The usefulness of influencing others may not be obvious to everyone. Indeed, you may not be conscious of the influence that you have on others. Think of influence as the ability to get others to do what you want. Technically, persuasion does not distinguish between positive and negative uses of this influencing ability. Though many think of persuasion in terms of seller haggling for a better deal with a merchant or a worker convincing his or her manager to give him or her a raise, some of the darker aspects of this skill fall under the term as well. Jane Austen wrote a book entitled Persuasion, and the title of the book will give you an idea of how most people think of the term. Published after the author's death, Persuasion delves into the many ways that people influence each other socially for good or ill. Considered one of the more complex of Austen's books, one that she wrote later in life after she honored her literary talents, Persuasion is a layered study of human interactions in the context of the stratified world of England in the early 1800s. Although literary scholars have not reached a consensus about how the title should be interpreted in the context of the book, some believe that Jane Austen attempted to distinguish between positive and negative forms of influence, especially as they related to the protagonist who must navigate through a complex social stratum. We begin our study of manipulation by discussing persuasion because this term is a perhaps more approachable doorway into the subject for many people. Persuasion is like the good witch, while many people consider manipulation to be the bad one. The truth is that the dividing line between the two is extremely thin, if it is there at all. If it helps you to sleep at night to think that you are persuading people rather than manipulating them, then by all means approach the subject from that standpoint. But we hope that you will soon see that there is more to manipulation than you previously thought. Equipped with this realization, you will be ready to influence others in a powerful, meaningful way. It is important to distinguish between positive and negative forms of influence because it is intended that you use the skills learned here for the purposes of helping others, yourself, and the world around you. Introducing you to this distinction is one of the goals of this chapter. It can be argued that persuasion used sinisterly can help you, but the case can also be made that the help you get from using influence or manipulation this way is only gained in the short term. Without delving too deeply into concepts of interconnectedness or karma, if you want to think of it that way, using influence negatively is something that can and will come back to haunt you. This is a running theme that you will encounter in this book, the importance of using your influence for good and why it is beneficial for you to behave this way. So on to manipulation. Of course, manipulation as an idea is very closely related to that of persuasion. Manipulation can be thought of as a psychological tactic utilized to impact or alter the thoughts or actions of others, essentially influencing them. As you can see from this definition, the line between manipulation and persuasion is a thin one. Indeed, the terms are often used interchangeably. Sometimes people will use the term persuasion when they want the listener to get the impression that the tactics or goals used are positive ones rather than the often underhanded techniques associated with manipulation. In fact, definitions of the term manipulation often incorporate the word underhanded, implying that manipulation is being used without the knowledge and consent of the target and ultimately not to their benefit. This could not be further from the truth. If you think about all the ways that others can be manipulated and are manipulated, you will find that humans are constantly engaged in a game of manipulation, and the majority of the time this manipulation is being used for good. These good uses of manipulation we can think of as ethical manipulation. The opposite of ethical manipulation would be unethical manipulation. When someone's actions are influenced to cause them to engage in an action that is detrimental to them, someone else, or society as a whole, that would be construed as unethical manipulation. Unethical manipulation is an instrument that is harmful to others and to society in general. We will discuss more on this subject in the next chapter as we seek to drive home why it is important for you to use the manipulation skills that you learn here ethically. Introduction to Ethical Manipulation. Before we delve into the rather involved world of ethics, we need to take a moment to discuss the different types of manipulation. This is important to do not only to better have a grasp of the subject of ethical manipulation before we tackle it, but also because the word manipulation is so heavy with meaning that the best strategy to talk about is really to clearly define it and its manifestations as much as possible. Defining the different types of manipulation will also help the reader to understand the difference between ethical and unethical manipulation, which will become clearer in the next chapter. Perhaps the most common form of manipulation is reinforcement. Reinforcement is one of the more straightforward ways that an individual can influence the thoughts and behaviors of others. Reinforcement basically hinges on the idea that one encourages a thought or behavior in another by associating it with something else. We will see that the human brain is very susceptible to imprinting of this kind. Indeed, as humans, we are not that different from ducklings that can learn to follow obediently and in a perfect line a human being rather than another duck. We will get into examples later, but think about the case of rewarding a child with a special dinner or a toy for doing well in school or completing their homework on time. This would be an example of positive reinforcement. Reinforcement is arguably the most obvious case of manipulation, but it is also one of several forms of the dark psychological art that are commonly used. Indeed, even within reinforcement, there are many different variations representing a toolbox that manipulators can use. You want to use these for good. You can use rewards, you can use praise or compliments, you can even use facial cues to reward or punish others, essentially reinforcing a desired behavior. But what are the other types of manipulation that can be used? Psychologists have compiled a long list of types of manipulation, but the main ones are summarized below. Reinforcement, positive or negative. Punishment, one-trial behavior. Bandwagon effect. Rationalization, seduction. As you can see from this list, there are some types of manipulation that lend themselves to negative uses, what we would refer to as unethical manipulation. You may also have reached the conclusion that reinforcement is probably the easiest type of manipulation to use, but it is not the only tool in your arsenal. It should not be. Some other types of manipulation can be useful at work, giving you the ability to influence those around you in a good way. Perhaps seduction is the example here that immediately stands out to you. This type of manipulation may jibe with ideas that you had about the art when you picked up the book. Manipulation as a way of turning a victim into a hapless tool that can be used for your purposes. Although we will not be exploring seduction here, since it is frequently used for unethical manipulation, it is important to point it out so that you, the reader, get a sense of how common manipulation is and the many forms that it can take. Although we will talk more about examples later, this is a good opportunity to discuss one form of manipulation that is being used actively today, with some public speakers and marketers even teaching their students how to use it. This is the bandwagon effect. What is it? The bandwagon effect is a way of encouraging behaviors in others by convincing them that their peers are doing the same thing, that a particular thought or behavior is common or normal, and that a particular individual may even be abnormal if they fall outside the pattern. At first bat, this may seem like a form of groupthink, and it is. The reality is that human beings think and behave in a group pattern, and the bandwagon effect is a way of influencing others by tapping into this tendency for humans to think and behave in this fashion. This group tendency of human beings combined with the great suggestibility of humans and other primates makes the bandwagon effect one of the most effective types of manipulation. One of the ways that humans learn what it means to be human and function in a group is observing others. As humans, we are primed to identify with others that we perceive as our peers. How we see yourself in a group will depend on you, but you may identify in a group based on gender, age, college or university you attended, where you live, or what you do for a living. This tendency to think in a group way is a characteristic of humans, and it is the underlying reason why the bandwagon effect works. This is a good place for an example to illustrate what the bandwagon effect really means and what it can mean for you. Internet marketers and social influencers actively use the bandwagon effect to create followers who they can then influence how they choose. This is part of the reason why social influencers exist as a modern-day profession and why many people, often very young, are able to make a six-figure salary just by having a large number of followers on various social media platforms. The aspect of the bandwagon effect, specifically as it relates to social media and the internet age, is sometimes referred to as a weaponized community. A weaponized community is a group of loyal followers that are under your influence. Celebrities have a weaponized community of fans who go to their concerts, purchase their products, or may follow them on social media. Businesses that use the bandwagon effect successfully also have a weaponized community of followers, people who consistently buy their products, defend their products, and attempt to influence others to do the same. If you are familiar with social media and marketing, you can see why having a weaponized community is smart and useful. Your community is like your team who supports you, uplifts you, and frankly are susceptible to influence by you. Yet this is all merely an application of the bandwagon effect, itself a specific type of manipulation. What is ethics? Ethics is the study of virtue and vice, good and evil, and humans have been studying the subject for thousands of years. The Greeks were among the most active groups to explore the topic of the morality of human beings, although they were by no means the only ones. It is difficult to say why the Greeks were so fascinated. Part of it had to do with the Greek method of instruction, which involved critical thinking. Now, teaching students to think critically and to behave rationally may seem obvious today. That's because modern Western civilization is founded on some of the practices that the Greeks began. Critical thinking is one of those. The Greeks used critical thinking to seriously examine the subject of ethics and to stimulate in their students and in the culture a practice of examining behavior critically. The study of ethics was by no means the exclusive purview of the Greeks. An entire period of European history was essentially inspired by this question of what human beings were and why they were, the so-called Age of Reason. The philosophers of this time were faced with changing ways of life, wealth flowing into Europe from all parts of the globe, as well as contact with different peoples who lived in another way and saw life through a different aperture. The philosophers felt that the old teaching did not prepare them for this new world. Much of how we view life today has been influenced by the answers that the French philosophers and others of this period reached to the salient questions they were asking. Ethics seeks to get at this idea of human morality. Most people who follow a particular religion or other way of thinking that basically addresses right and wrong may feel that this question of right and wrong is obvious. It may not be as obvious as you think. In fact, the Europeans who traveled the world were puzzled that the people they encountered did not always have the same sense of right and wrong that they did. In reality, this is an issue of different ethical systems. Although early studies in ethics focused on how people should be, the philosophers' own ideas of how humans should live in a perfect world, later meanderings seem to ask the questions of how human beings are naturally. This was really the subject that the Age of Reason philosophers loved because they were, in a sense, attempting to distance themselves from the obvious positions that came from religion to sincerely and honestly answer the question of what it means to be human. In reality, what ethics tries to do is to take what human beings are, the basic constituents, and to guide them. This is a truly difficult undertaking, especially as different cultures do not always have the same sense of right and wrong. Taking an apple from an apple tree growing on someone's property may be considered in one culture stealing, while another culture may assert that it is not stealing because the apple tree is common property that no one owns. Even the land itself may be considered to belong to no one person alone in some cultures. Regardless of what you may think about this philosopher or the next, a true study on ethics, true guidance on the subject, requires a deep understanding of what it means to be human. We have introduced you somewhat to aspects of human behavior. at least as they are relevant to this book, but an ethical study requires a deep knowledge of what motivates people and how they function under ordinary circumstances. Glossing over the subject of what it means to be human or approaching the discussion dishonestly is ineffective and does not accomplish the goal of guiding humans toward good. Therefore, ethics is the study of human morality, and it seeks to guide humans towards being good, often in spite of their nature. You can probably see where manipulation comes in here. It goes without saying that a skilled manipulator has the potential to do a lot of harm. A manipulator can use their skills unethically, especially if they understand how human beings behave and what motivates them. Using knowledge of people to do harm is not the goal here. Ethical manipulation means understanding what it means to be good, providing benefit to others and to the world, and then using your powers of influence to do just that. The issue of suggestibility. Manipulation is potentially dangerous because of the innate tendency for human beings to be susceptible. People may do bad things or even fall under the influence of a bad person without truly being conscious of it. There are so many examples of this throughout history of suggestibility being used for dangerous effect that it is outside the scope of this book to discuss them fully here. Think about the populist politics of the late Roman Republic and how Romans slaughtered each other in the streets in support of one leader or the next. Imagine the Roman Colosseum where Romans traveled daily to this arena to watch people fight each other to death or to be fed to wild animals like lions or tigers. The point is not for you to get a sense that suggestibility is generally a negative quality of people. In fact, you may soon discover that this knack of being suggestible is a fundamental part of some of the things that we as humans do. Like all other aspects of manipulation, suggestibility can have an ethical side and an unethical one. Ponder the impact that Grigory Rasputin was able to have on the Imperial Russian court during the last days of the Romanovs. Many people at the time held him responsible for controversial policies and political appointments made in the last days of Imperial Russia. He was regarded as so dangerous that some people thought it was essential to Russia that he be removed from the political sphere by any means necessary. How was Rasputin able to gain such influence over the rulers of one of the largest empires in world history and its elite, while much of the population lived as little more than voiceless peasants? Was Grigory Rasputin able to have this impact on wealthy and presumably educated people because he was so darn good-looking and a sharp dresser? No, Rasputin was shabbily dressed, had a terrible haircut, and frankly looked like he had just gotten off the last freight train from Siberia. Was there some quality that Rasputin had that others lacked, a quality which made him irresistible? Perhaps, but the power of Grigory Rasputin, in truth, lay somewhere else. Grigory Rasputin and others like him have been so influential because they understood the suggestibility of people. Rasputin was believed to have been able to cure the Tsarevich Alexei merely by applying his hands to the child during one of his crises. The heir to the Imperial Russian throne suffered from hemophilia, a medical condition that causes uncontrolled bleeding due to the absence of certain coagulation factors needed to create clots in the blood. Was Rasputin able to stop these attacks because he had magical powers to alter the composition of his blood? Was Rasputin truly a holy man sent from God to save Russia, which he did not do, or was he merely able to use the powers of influence in a way so profound that it has rarely been encountered in human history? The world may never know. The case for Grigory Rasputin's use of suggestion is supported by accounts of the influence the mystic had on others around him, like the empress and members of the Russian court. The mystic did not merely influence the heir to the throne, he influenced nearly everyone that he came into contact with. Women threw themselves at the shabby monk, including some of the highest-placed, most pedigreed women in Russia. Generals fought each other to be placed under his patronage. Indeed, half of the power Rasputin had at the time seemed to be the stories that were told and circulated about him. He was said to have magical sensual energy that was irresistible to women. That story alone was probably enough to earn him female admirers, which you will see is because ideas have a magical way of inspiring thoughts and actions in others. This is the power of suggestion, and the story of Rasputin demonstrates in a truly startling way. Although people were drawn to him with an almost centripetal force, some reported having been repelled by him, perhaps discovering that they were in the presence of someone whose powers of influence, of manipulation, were so great that they would be unable to resist unless their mind retreated to being disgusted or repulsed, perhaps a defense mechanism. The truth is that suggestion is a deep quality of the human mind. It is one that we acquired through a very long period of evolution. Without stumbling too deeply into that subject, we can say that suggestibility, or a form of it, is present in other primates like chimpanzees. These apes, our closest relatives in the animal kingdom, learn by actively, sometimes passively, observing each other. This learning requires that the brain be particularly attuned to images that come from others of the same species. A chimp learns to use tools by watching another chimp use the sample tool. That is nothing but a simple suggestion. It is this suggestion that forms the basis of manipulation. You may be asking yourself why humans are so suggestible, or perhaps the answer is obvious. Suggestibility allows us to learn from one another quickly and effectively. If we were not suggestible to images and patterns, we would learn things with great difficulty. Suggestibility is why humans, and primates in general, are such miraculous learners compared to other members of the animal kingdom. This tendency is tapped into by dark psychology, allowing others to learn how they can influence others to accomplish specific results. Because of suggestion, we can learn the words and alphabets of language with great rapidity and miraculous memory. We can watch something once, behavior of some kind, and be able to repeat it on the second try. This is something that we take for granted, but it is an intrinsic part of why humans have been able to create civilization. This suggestibility can lead you on a dangerous and unethical path like Rasputin, who wound up floating in the icy waters of the Neva. Instead, we hope to teach you how you can use this basic human trait to infuse passivity into your life and the life of others. Examples of ethical manipulation. One of your goals in reading this book on the art of mastering manipulation is learning how you can use ethical manipulation to change the world. As humans, we are able to alter the world around us to match our desires. Now we can do that unethically and create a world of misery for others and eventually ourselves, or we can create a world where our positive thoughts create a world that is better than how we found it. Ethical manipulation is the skill of using influence for good, and perhaps the best examples involve dealing with 4 common types of manipulation: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, the bandwagon effect, and punishment. There is a 5th area that we can discuss, one which straddles the line between being its own form of manipulation and being one of the other types. This is self-manipulation, the ability to suggest thoughts to ourselves, what some may construe as a type of positive reinforcement or suggestion. Examples of positive reinforcement as a type of manipulation abound. To jog your memory, positive reinforcement essentially involves encouraging a particular thought or behavior by rewarding it. This reward system allows the person being influenced to make a connection between the behavior and the positive result or reward in their mind. Again, Humans and other animals are able to make connections like this because of suggestibility. Indeed, one could argue that humans are quite a bit more suggestible than dogs, making this technique even more useful on your friends and family members than your furry and scaly friends. So what are some examples of positive reinforcement? Top earners at a company are rewarded for their performance with trips to Disney World or large quarterly bonuses. Your wife rewards you for bringing fresh flowers home after work by cooking you your favorite meal. You reward your dog for sitting properly by giving him a special treat. A television program rewards you for staying tuned after the break by answering the question that was asked before the break. A credit card company or bank rewards you for using your card at a certain frequency or spending a certain amount by giving you cash banks or points. A personal trainer rewards customers for joining his social media group by giving them free training sessions. An office manager rewards his employees for coming to a meeting by providing food, coffee, or other goodies. Children who do well on their school test are allowed to stay up an hour later by their parents. A new recruit who pushes himself in training is accepted by other peers who greet him with a handshake and a smile. The purpose of providing you with these examples was not so that you can incorporate them into your life, though you certainly can. The idea here is to understand how common, powerful, and beneficial manipulation can be. Despite what some people may think, manipulation does not have to be utilized to create a negative result. Perhaps the greatest power that manipulation can have is as a force for good. As you may have seen from the list, positive reinforcement generally involves a reward of some kind, although this reward may not always be so obvious. The reward does not have to be something tangible. A friendly glance, acceptance, or some other social cue can also be a manner of reward that encourages a thought or behavior. This reward system not only taps into our tendency as humans to want to accumulate good things, which the rewards represent, but it also taps into another human quality, our desire to be accepted. At some level, the person you're manipulating may not only desire to be accepted by the group, but also by you. There are many more examples of ethical manipulation that fall outside the realm of positive reinforcement. We touched on the case of the bandwagon effect earlier. What would be an example of someone using the bandwagon effect as a form of ethical manipulation? A mother is concerned that her son is somewhat of a loner and wants him to make more friends and find a girlfriend. So she tells her son that his hero, a famous baseball player who he aspires to be like, was the most popular kid in the high school and already had 3 girlfriends at that age. What has that mother done? Well, she has used the bandwagon effect to manipulate her son in what she believes to be a positive or an ethical way. The bandwagon tactic works because of our tendency as humans to perceive our own identity in relation to others. Even someone who may be uninterested in being a part of a group still on some level identifies with some other human who currently lives or has lived in the past. These people, who may seem difficult to manipulate at first, can in reality be manipulated just like anyone else. Still need some convincing on the subject? Well, perhaps the mother in this case has a son or daughter who aspires to be a writer and does not want to go to college because they do not believe it is necessary. They do not care that all the other students in their senior class are applying to colleges because they do not particularly like these other students. Well, all the parent would have to do in this case is find an example of a writer who did go to college and who the child likes and relates to, and they have found a way to manipulate using the bandwagon effect. The key to using this tactic ethically is understanding that humans, again, see themselves in relation to others. This is especially true of generally inexperienced young people. They are still finding their way in the world, still teasing out their identity, so by finding another person that they can identify with, or who they already identify with, You have found a means of using ethical manipulation for the benefit of you and them both. This is perhaps why the bandwagon effect is being put to such effective use in the age of the internet and social media. Many social media users are in the demographic of 18 to 35 or younger, and they may generally be more susceptible to the type of suggestibility that underlines the bandwagon effect. Americans, particularly young people, are living their lives online. They make friends online, they join social and work groups online, they may find a romantic interest or casual partner online. They may even find a spouse online. Using the bandwagon effect effectively is important to making the most of the art of ethical manipulation in the present information age. Negative reinforcement and punishment can also be a tool used for ethical manipulation. The most obvious example of this is the punitive system that is the basis of many, if not most, legal systems around the world. People who commit a crime or who engage in any other behavior that the government disapproves of are punished for it. Someone who breaks the law may be dealt a hefty fine, may be required to perform community service, or may even face prison time. Although it may not seem like it at first, this is a form of ethical manipulation being used to discourage behaviors by handling them punitively. Of course, the argument can be made that governments sometimes use the penal system unethically, and therefore the punitive aspect of most judicial systems is not necessarily ethical, and that is a fair point. The idea to take away from this example, however, is not that from the standpoint of the government, which has inscribed its particular sense of ethics in the form of the law. Punishments are used to ethically handle behaviors that are deemed morally wrong, dangerous, and otherwise malign, essentially engaging in a form of what can be thought of as ethical manipulation. Distinction between negative reinforcement and punishment. There is a fine line between negative reinforcement and punishment. Part of the distinction has to do with the intentions of the manipulator and the impact that it had on the target. While negative reinforcement has the intention of discouraging a behavior in the target by penalizing them in some fashion, punishment does not necessarily have this intention. When a convicted person is sent to prison, this is just as much to remove that person from the general population as it is to discourage the behavior in other people. Punishment does serve the dual purpose of negative reinforcement and literally punishing someone for a bad behavior, but it really forms a circle that overlaps with negative reinforcement because punishment does not necessarily have the intention of influencing someone. Think of it this way. Let us say that an island has a population that consisted of 100 members of government and only a single free person. Or better yet, one member of government and one free person. If that free person were convicted of a crime and sentenced to death, is that to discourage anyone through negative reinforcement? No, the only free person on the island has now been punished and there is no one around to be influenced. If punishment is its own circle, think of reinforcement as a circle that overlaps with it. The area between the two circles is negative reinforcement. It can be a little confusing as many psychologists consider punishment its own form of manipulation aside from negative reinforcement. In this way, punishment is a way to exert our will or influence on others, apart from long-term desire to steer their behavior in a particular direction, as is the case with reinforcement. The benefit of ethical manipulation. There are many benefits of using ethical manipulation as a means of influencing those around you for good. As manipulation is a behavior pattern that humans engage in normally, aside from our personal beliefs about the more negative manifestations of the art, it would benefit everyone if we all learned how to use this behavior pattern or skill in an ethical way. Imagine how wonderful in the world we live it would be if we thought of the ways that our actions influence others, not how they impact us, but how they impact them. This is the beginning of understanding the difference between ethical and unethical manipulation. Unethical manipulation is the tool of the narcissist, the person who thinks only of themselves and not of others. The desire of the narcissist is to impose their will on those around them at any cost, and the impact that is to be had on these persons, who can properly be termed victims in this case, is irrelevant. Chapter 2. Unethical Manipulation. An excellent study in the uses and pitfalls of unethical manipulation is the 18th century French novel Dangerous Liaisons. The subject of this book, which has made at least 2 major movie appearances in the English language, is the decadent and intricate world of France right before the French Revolution. It was a world where aristocrats cavorted through the well-lit halls of Versailles and down the crowded streets of Paris. Many of them had no occupation, as they derived all of their income from land worked by peasants, and so they were left with little to do but find ways to pass the time. The story, written in the once popular form of the epistolary novel, involves the exploits of 2 of these wealthy and languorous aristocrats. The epistolary novel is a literary form that involves telling the story in the form of letters that the main characters send to one another. Part of what makes their story so powerful is that the tale not only manages to paint a meaningful picture of a society that was hurtling toward destruction, but it encapsulated many of the ideas of Voltaire and others about human nature and the possibility that individuals can be reformed. The Marquis and the Vicomte are former lovers who are part of a Paris society where it seems everyone has a lover and no one has the time or interest to sincerely care about the feelings of anyone else. The Marquise becomes enraged when she learns that a lover to whom she was closely attached becomes engaged to a pretty young virgin named Cécile. The Marquise enlists Valmont to exact her revenge by convincing him to deflower the young woman before her marriage. At about the same time, Valmont, who is just as narcissistic and headless as the Marquis, falls in love with a beautiful young married woman while visiting a relative in the country. He decides to seduce her, as that is what the narcissists of Paris do when they encounter a beautiful woman, using his own arts of manipulation to gain her interest. Valmont seduces the woman just as much for her reputed virtue and the pride that comes from causing her to lose it as he does from a desire to win the favor of a beautiful woman. But in the process, something strange happens. He falls in love. Valmont ends in carrying on affairs with both young women, eventually inciting the ire of the Marquise, who not only resents Valmont for acting outside of her manipulative whims, but who also still loves him, albeit in a seedy, selfish way. The Marquise manipulates Cécile's music teacher into challenging Valmont to a duel. Valmont, both a manipulator himself and the instrument of the Marquise' manipulations, is killed. Madame de Tourvel, the woman he loves, herself dies of illness. But in typical Age of Reason fashion, the Marquise de Motual is not spared her just desserts, so to speak. The letters detailing her unethical manipulations and the results that have caused are circulated throughout Paris, and she is shamed into fleeing to the countryside. She eventually finds herself stricken with pox, her once great beauty, the main weapon in her arsenal of unethical manipulation, now gone, and her reputation permanently destroyed. In his magnum opus, Les Liaisons Dangereuses, French author Chandelorose de la Crosse seems to warn against a society in which no one believes anything and everyone acts merely out of a pure animal instinct to fulfill their desires. Perhaps this is what some later writers would term bankrupt morality, which was explored by 19th century writers in tomes like Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. In exquisite fashion, the unlikely hero of the story, the Vicomte de Valmont, seemed to be reformed by the healing power of love, which seems to form the distinction between the purely narcissistic, almost bestial whims of the Marquise de la Motual and this hypothetical concept of what it means to be human that was really the essential question of the Age of Reason. As a question, it is an interesting and important one. Some have argued that it is our animal impulses which make us human. Others posit that it is the higher qualities of mind and our desires to live in accordance with them that is the mark of humanity. Are all human narcissists, or are all animals narcissists? And the human comes into being when we are able to act ethically outside of the constraints of selfish will. This is a question of which the answer even the philosophers of the Age of Reason could not agree. It is a question that Sigmund Freud perhaps knew the answer to, but a long discussion on the subject is outside the scope of this work. Suffice it to say that Les Lésions Dangereuses appears to be a study of a narcissistic world, indeed one that resembles our own more than superficially. This chapter is not intended to be a book summary of a significant French novel, but a discourse on the subject of unethical manipulation. In order to fully grasp the subject, the reader needs to understand what it is and why it is a problem. One must not be a philosopher to grasp the subject, but one does not need a palpable example of the pitfalls of unethical manipulation and the narcissism that is its motivation to understand why you should not wander into these shark-infested waters. If you, after reading this book, choose to become an unethical manipulator or a narcissist, are you liable to meet the end of the Marquise de la Montelle, fleeing to the country with your reputation in tatters and your face marked with the indelible signs of smallpox? No, this is nothing more than a bit of 18th century French melodrama, but we would warn you that we all suffer the consequences of our action one day, even if that day is decades later. The narcissist plays with fire, playing a game that is designed to crush the animal that gives it a go. Nature has the measure of man, and the house always wins. What is unethical manipulation? Unethical manipulation is the act of influencing others for the purpose of doing harm. That harm may be to a specific person or to a group of people. This is the type of act that many people think of when they hear the term manipulation, but it is merely a specific type of manipulation. Ethics, the moral idea that guides how humans should behave, gives us an idea of the sorts of actions and intentions that we might construe as ethical, contrasted with those that most agree should properly be regarded as unethical. As mentioned in the previous chapter, it is not always easy to form a clear distinction between ethical and unethical actions because differing culture mores and standards are the question of objective good and evil, not an easy one to answer. Many of you reading this may have a religious or philosophical belief system that helps you to distinguish the ethical from the unethical. Indeed, some of you may not understand the question because your senses of ethics is so decided that it is difficult to imagine how anyone can be confused on the subject. Because of the differing values that mark various populations around the world, it is not a simple task to say what precisely is ethical and what is not. Nearly everyone should agree that murder is wrong. Most would agree that stealing is wrong. We have already presented the moral issue of how societies may not approach stealing the same way because of different beliefs that are had regarding property, ownership of property, communal rights to certain property, and the like. Because of the involved nature of clearly making a list of all unethical actions, we will have to hope that the reader has some sense of what is ethical and what is not. We can generally say that any action that causes harm to someone or influences someone to harm another person is unethical. We say that with the knowledge that there will not even be agreement on the idea of harm. When you tell someone a lie, even a so-called white one, have you harmed them? The law may define any infringement on the person or private property of someone else as harm, while you may see it differently. Maybe you helped someone you believe to be innocent escape from the police. Have you performed harm? Have you committed an unethical act? The issue of ethical versus unethical truly stumbles into murky waters. Again, the example of taking an apple from an apple tree on someone's property is a salient one. Is this an unethical act? The purpose of the discussion is not to answer the question, but to hammer in this idea of unethical behavior and to force you to address this issue of unethical behaviors in your own mind. Most people have a sense of right and wrong. Where they derive that sense from is beside the point for the purpose of this discussion. You know generally when you are doing something that you should not do. Did the Marquise know that she was wrong when she manipulated others in her social structure to destroy them to please herself? Most likely she did. The issue here is that the narcissist does not care ultimately about the harm that they do to others. They perceive life as an exercise of exerting one's will on others for one's own benefit, even if exerting that influence can lead to the death or destruction of another person. This is the epitome of what it means to behave in an unethical fashion. If you take nothing away from this chapter, take away that. An unethical manipulator has complete disregard for the welfare of others. They are a narcissist, and they are a danger to others and perhaps even to themselves. Characteristics of unethical manipulators. By now you probably have a sense of what an unethical manipulator looks like, even if the question of specific acts are unethical or not is a confused one. Unfortunately, most of us have dealt with unethical manipulators or narcissists in our life. They can have really calamitous influence on the people around them, committing harmful acts all while wearing a smile. The Marquise in this story is an easy reference point for you if you feel that you still do not have a grasp of what an unethical person looks like, though we suspect you have probably come across one or two of these people in your time. The characteristics of the unethical manipulator are exhibited in such a way that allows these people to influence those around them in a very dramatic fashion. The Marquise in the story was beautiful, rich, had lovely manners, had a wide circle of friends and admirers, and had many lovers. She loved attention and felt slighted easily. And when she was slighted, she was not satisfied until she had completely destroyed the person that had injured her. She did not care if her actions resulted in irreparable damage or even the death of her targets. The Marquise was a game player. She saw life as a game of exerting influence on others, even if that influence resulted in death. She saw it as perfectly natural to destroy someone if you were displeased with them or disliked them. She was willing to destroy the innocent young Cecile merely because the young woman had the misfortune of being the target of an arranged marriage with one of her former lovers. The unethical manipulator, the narcissist, is fickle and easily slighted. No injury is too slight to incite their fury. They love as strongly as they hate. Perhaps they never really love at all. The Marquise was able to destroy both the men that she had presumably loved and merely go on with life as if nothing had happened. The Marquise saw the world as an object that was hers to bend and shape into a possession. Even the inhabitants of her social circle were almost inanimate objects to twist, pick up, and destroy. Someone who lives like that, seeing the world as objects of their own desire or instruments for their will, can never really care about others. An ethical person at heart cares about others. They understand that life on this world is not merely about ourselves, but about the other people that exist in our social circle and more remotely on our world. A discussion can be had on whether or not certain aspects of society have tended to make us all more narcissistic, and it is a legitimate idea. Have we all become like the Marquise, caring only about what we want, and generally insensate that humans, as a species, are designed to live in a group fashion? It is easy to understand the characteristics of the unethical manipulator or narcissist when you examine the character of the Marquise from Les Lésions Dangereuses. Even her name is superficial, the title of Marquise being associated in many people's minds with the new aristocracy that did not have a place in the traditional pattern of social relationships that were based on feudalism. A marquise might be the representative of an old family, or she may merely be the person of wealth, perhaps a relative of one of the king's mistresses, or the king's mistress herself, like the Marquise de Pompadour. So what were the characteristics of the unethic manipulator that were displayed by the Marquise de Montreal? The Marquise, like other unethical people, was extremely superficial, slighted easily, determined to exact revenge on anyone responsible for a perceived slight, prone to strong feelings of love or hate, intolerant, arguably incapable of feeling love, unconcerned with issues of life or death when it comes to others, notable for a false demeanor, perhaps often smiling or laughing without respect to the situation, convinced that the concerns of others were irrelevant, blasé about doing harm to others, even people they have never met. Anyone with a background or some passing familiarity with psychology will note that most of these are characteristics of individuals displaying narcissistic personality disorder. Indeed, the traits of the unethic manipulator are so dangerous that there is a specific condition in the Psychiatrist Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or DSM, devoted to them. Some psychiatrists regard the sufferer of this disorder as the most dangerous that can be encountered in the profession, as their tools of manipulation are so well sharpened that the victim often fails to notice that they are even being used. Consider this. The Marquise, though a vessel of rage, spite, and passion, always seemed to have her game face on. She was beautiful, sweet, and pleasant, or at least appeared to be. This is part of what makes the unethical manipulator so dangerous. You may not even know that you are being manipulated until you have already been destroyed. The people of Paris would never have known about the Marquise's true nature if her letters had not been found and circulated. What should you take away from this? In spite of the superficial appeal of manipulation, you do not desire to be an unethical manipulator. The unethical manipulator embodies the primal urges that are characteristic of animals and of which we humans are capable of better. One of the hallmarks of humanity is that we can care about others in a deep way. We can act to benefit others, sometimes even to our own detriment. The ethical manipulator is able to exert his or her influence on those around to make life better. You can inspire people to be better than what they think they are. You can influence others to invest in themselves and live happy lives. Your motivation is not merely to play with people's lives like moving chess pieces around on the chessboard, which is what the unethical manipulator does. You understand the concept of interconnectivity, that we all rise and fall together. Influence can be used to improve the human lot. This is something that the ethical manipulator appreciates. The unethical manipulator does not and cannot understand this. The unethical manipulator sees the world as something that exists for its own desires. All of their actions are permeated by the perception, just like the Marquise in the story. For the unethical manipulator, the world is filled with victims waiting to be victimized. It is perhaps this fundamental perception of the world that distinguishes the true unethical manipulator from the truly ethical one. An ethical person does not see the world filled with lives waiting to be harmed, but with creatures not unlike him or herself. This world does not exist for us alone, and once you understand that, you are able to behave in a truly ethical way. The downside of unethical manipulation. Why this type of behavior is bad almost goes without saying. A world filled with narcissists is a world where we are all harming each other and making one another miserable. The world can be a place where we can all be happy, or at least most of us. All it takes is a little hard work and goodwill on our part. As the unethical manipulator's actions are motivated by ill will, and as the world is a little more than a stage for them to exert their influence, the world becomes a place filled with ill will, and ill will that may one day be directed towards the unethical manipulator. As stated previously, intentions are important here. The world can take shape around us. When we are motivated by ill will and spite, then the world will become a place filled with spite. This is almost a message that underlies Les Liaisons Dangereuses. Eventually, the Marques's distorted and repugnant way of viewing the world becomes directed at herself. As she does not perceive the world as something beautiful and worthy of preserving, she too becomes something that is not beautiful and which falls by the wayside. The downside of unethical manipulation, one of many, is that you will create for yourself a space that you do not want to live in. You will create a kitchen that is too hot even for yourself. Most of you reading this have likely never felt the desire to behave narcissistically, but perhaps some of you have. The desire can almost be forgiven. We live in a look-at-me culture, and that impenetrable vanity is step one to becoming a narcissist. If you are reading this and thinking that you do not want to be that sort of person, then this is a good sign. This indicates that you do have a desire to influence people, but only to help them. If this is the case for you, then read on. Examples of unethical manipulation. It is tempting to return to the case of Grigory Rasputin to discuss the examples of unethical manipulation, but it is a sticky subject. It is hard to gauge Rasputin because there is so much about him that is not entirely clear to the modern person studying his life. That he had great powers of manipulation is clear. That there was some irresistible quality that he was able to use to great effect is also clear. What his motivations were is not clear. We keep getting back to the issue of motivation because this is the easiest way to distinguish an ethical manipulator from an unethical one. You want to manipulate others. Why? Is it because you want to improve their lives by introducing them to a new friend or romantic interest? Or do you want to manipulate them out of revenge, spite, or to do harm for some other reason? It all comes down to motivation. When you look at examples of unethical manipulation, it should become clear that there are instruments being used to harm people, not to help them. The underlying motivations are not altruistic or munificent, but selfish. When it comes to categories of manipulation and where these examples fall, they really are not too different from the general categories of manipulation that were discussed in the previous chapter. Positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, punishment, bandwagon effect, these can all be used to exert influence on others with sinister design. The Marquise was beautiful, so she was able to exert her influence through seduction and through the positive reinforcement that come in the form of a smile from her or the feeling that her victims were pleasing a well-connected, attractive woman who it was pleasant to be around. The long and short of it is that the same weapons of manipulation that can be used ethically can be utilized unethically. Some examples can help to paint a clearer picture for you. A husband is mad at his wife, so he rewards the dog for going in her closet and eating her clothes by giving it a treat, reinforcing the behavior. A mother does not want her son to go away to college, and she punishes him for doing research online by failing to pay the bill for the internet, resulting in its disconnection. An employee punishes a coworker for earning top marks on the job by spreading dangerous rumors every time the employee's name is at the top of the performance list. A woman is mad that her ex-husband is in a new relationship, so she punishes him by going to the court and attempting to gain sole custody of their child. A factory supervisor is irritated that employees have decided to meet with the union rep to discuss unsafe work conditions, so he cuts the hours of the ringleader on the next weekly schedule. A college freshman is furious that her ex-boyfriend has been speaking to another classmate romantically, so she punishes him by letting him borrow her car to pick up his sister from the airport and then calls the police to report it stolen. The tie that binds these examples of unethical manipulation together is the motivation. Once you understand what the intention is, it is clear whether an action is ethical or unethical. The supervisor who cuts employees' hours because he does not want them to improve their working conditions is behaving unethically whether he realizes it or not. The ex-wife who attempts to take joint custody away from her former spouse because she is jealous and enraged is also behaving unethically. Parental rights are for the benefit of the children, and that should be the deciding factor. Many examples of unethical manipulation utilize negative reinforcement or punishment to exert influence, but any type of manipulation can be used. Positive reinforcement can be used as well. A parent may encourage bad behavior in a child in order to blame it on the other parent and discredit them. A pet can be reinforced positively to do a bad behavior as a way to punish someone else in the household that the manipulator is displeased with. If these examples have not driven the point home, all the reader needs to do is to think of the Marquise from the La Légions de Jurossis. She manipulated the music teacher into a duel with the Vicomte de Valmont to punish Valmont for angering her, resulting in his death. She used seduction to twist the actions of those around her for the purpose of doing harm. Her motivations were clear. It was not about anyone but herself, and this is the hallmark both of the unethical manipulator and of the narcissist. Chapter 3: Manipulation at Work. Introduction to Manipulation by Institutions. Manipulation is used by institutions to exert influence on employees, customers, and anyone else that falls under its perceived scope of power. Companies attempt to influence the thoughts and behaviors of customers and potential customers, especially when it comes to buying practices. Media outlets, from print media to the cable news network, attempt to shape your perceptions on important topics of the day, sometimes to encourage you to keep watching, and sometimes for reasons that are clear only to themselves. Manipulation is even utilized by militaries to exert influence on one another. Most people are familiar with the idea of an arms race. Perhaps the most famous arms race occurred during the period of the Cold War, in which the militaries of the United States and Soviet Union attempted to influence the actions of one another, particularly in the realm of nuclear weapons. This arms race was even played out in a way that eventually led to placing a man on the moon. Although we may not think of the actions of the Cold War period as involving manipulation, the period was literally dripping with actions reflecting both ethical and unethical manipulations. For many people growing up during the time, the images of large militaries and the idea of a coming nuclear war may have been so alarming that the thought that there was a little bit of thought influencing happening may have slipped the minds of even the most intellectual observers. National governments attempt to influence both the thoughts and actions of their citizenry, as well as the thoughts and actions of people in other countries and even of their governments. The Cold War was rife with images of the Soviet military parading its intercontinental missiles and its well-trained soldiers past the Kremlin. People in Europe, the United States, and around the world were impressed by the machine-like precision of the soldiers on march, and not least of all by their sheer numbers. This was all part of the Soviet propaganda machine, an attempt to instill fear in foreign countries, thereby allowing the Soviet Union to exert greater influence than it otherwise might have had. Propaganda is arguably a very pure form of manipulation. Thoughts and images are repeated to viewers in order to reinforce an idea. The idea here was that the Soviet Union was the mightiest nation on earth, and as this largest of nations started to crumble from within, those reinforcing images seemed to ramp up and become even more impressive. The leaders of the Soviet Union understand how imprintable the human mind is. They imprinted an image of strength on their own citizens and on people around the world. But this type of manipulation is not the only way that institutions like governments and militaries attempt to influence the thoughts and behaviors of other institutions. A military in wartime not only attempts to defeat another military by the use of sheer force, but they also seek to demoralize them, stripping them of their will to fight. This demoralization is so powerful a tool that wars have been won using it alone. Using manipulation in a group setting. After diving headfirst into the seedy world of unethical manipulation, it is time to redirect you back to how you can use the art of manipulation to exert positive influence on those around you. Although the topic of this chapter is the use of manipulation in the institutional setting, including a study of how the institutions themselves can be manipulated, the overall goal is to drive home how manipulation can be used ethically. Some are wary to enter the world of manipulation because either they feel that they will not be able to distinguish between ethical and unethical manipulation, or they see manipulation as a can of worms that will lead to the temptation to act unethically. One of the takeaway points of this chapter and of the book is that manipulation is already playing a role in your life. Individuals and institutions are manipulating you and the world around you. Your best course of action is to understand how you can take advantage of the proper knowledge in this area in order to engage in this exchange ethically. Although we can only convince you so much that ethical manipulation can be used for good and that you should give it a try, what we can tell you is that you know yourself. If you are like most people, you understand that human nature is just that, human nature. You may not be able to stop those around you from manipulating you, including the various institutions that you interact with, but you can learn how to be a positive player in this exchange. Manipulation as a military tactic. War is a game that involves more than physical force. A successful military is able to exert greater influence than its rivals, being skillful in the art of manipulation. In his book, The Art of War, ancient Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu laid out the many aspects of waging war so thoroughly that his book is still read and followed more than 2,000 years later. Some of the most successful military leaders in world history have attested to reading his book and drawing influence, including the founder of the modern-day People's Republic of China, Mao Zedong. Although manipulation is not generally considered to be a central topic of Sun Tzu's work, the idea of manipulation underlies some of the tactics that the author suggests. Sun Tzu goes over using stratagem to effectively attack your enemy. Military leaders drew inspiration from this work to engage in attacking enemies on multiple fronts, essentially not only crushing them, but irreparably demoralizing them, a tactic that will be discussed in more detail later. Sun Tzu talks about having an effective system of espionage. Now, it may seem obvious why it is important for an army or a government to have spies, but the reality is that there is an element of manipulation here. How is one able to manipulate someone or something if you have no information? Espionage and intelligence gathering is one of the essential tools of manipulation. It's also a tool that an effective manipulator uses at an individual level, whether ethically or unethically. Consider this. If one individual wanted to unethically manipulate another, they would first need to know something about the person they hope to manipulate. Think about blackmail or seduction. In order to blackmail someone, you would have to know something about that person that they did not wish others to know. The same holds true for seduction. How do you seduce someone if you do not know what their tastes are? But the militaries of today go far beyond the schemes laid out in Sun Tzu's The Art of War in their use of manipulation. How do militaries manipulate other militaries on and off the field? There are a number of ways that they can do this, but here are a few. Punishment, propaganda, demoralization. Punishment is an obvious form of manipulation that militaries use against one another. What does a military do when it is displeased with the action of another country or its military? It launches an airstrike. Even the United States military engages in this tactic of military strikes against governments that it regards as hostile to American interests, especially when they have recently engaged in an act that is perceived as being a hostile act to the U.S. The Spanish-American War was started when an American ship was attacked. Remember, the Maine was the cry. This attack was responded to by the U.S. with a full-scale invasion of Cuba and other Spanish colonies by American soldiers. Whether or not this sinking of the Maine was orchestrated by some within the U.S. to trigger the conflict is another story. If it was, this in itself is an act of manipulation designed to steer public opinion in the direction of support of punishing the Spanish Empire with war. Messages of punishment are designed not only to influence the target, but they are a clear message to other militaries and governments as well. When an Air Force or Naval Air Wing launches an attack on a foreign target, they are not only influencing the actions and thoughts of the target, but they are also attempting to influence the thoughts and actions of other nations. It's no different than the Kremlin parading its missiles down Red Square to instill fear in its enemies and admiration in its friends. Punishment is a powerful weapon of military manipulation because it can lead to quick response in the target. Nations that are near peer in military capabilities might engage in a series of airstrikes against one another, but often the result is that the nation targeted by the airstrike accedes to whatever demand or wish that the manipulator has expressed. In this fashion, a military can successfully accomplish a goal without having to engage in an expensive, prolonged military conflict or a war. Punishment is not the only weapon in the manipulation arsenal of the modern military. Another powerful tool that we have touched on is propaganda. Militaries and their government can use propaganda to instill fear in other militaries and their respective government. When the United States military unveils a new weapon, a major motivation is often to influence how other nations perceive the American military or the United States as a world power. If it was not about manipulation, why reveal a weapon at all? Wouldn't it be wiser for a military to keep a new arsenal of weapons secret, for example, a new application of stealth technology or a shiny new aircraft carrier? But militaries do not keep this information secret because they recognize this type of propaganda as a tool that can be used to manipulate the perceptions of militaries and people outside of the country. You may be wondering why we are referring to this as propaganda. It is propaganda because it is information that is disseminated with the specific intent of influencing the perception of others. The United States military is very good at this type of manipulation. Because our military is so good at it, most nations shy away from the very idea of open war with the United States. Through this tactic alone, the tactic of skillfully releasing certain tidbits of information on the American military to others, the United States is able to exert military, political, and economic influence on nations around the world, arguably to a greater degree than any other nation on the earth today. Demoralization as a military tool. Few tactics of manipulation are able to work to dramatic effect the way that demoralization does. It is impossible to say how long this tactic has been used in war, but we can say that the militaries of today make active use of it. World War II provided many dramatic examples of demoralization as a tool to encourage an enemy to leave the war. As World War II was turning into a war of attrition between the two camps, the Allies began to resort to various forms of demoralization to weaken their Axis foes. The most obvious tactic was the strategic bombing of cities, causing both physical and psychological damage. This is a controversial subject, as some believe that the militaries of this greatest of wars may have gone too far with their attack of non-strategic sites, but this is an ethical gray area. Is it better to let a war drag on for another few years and risk more soldiers' deaths? Or is it better to engage in a stratagem to cause your enemy to leave the fight quickly? Perhaps the most famous example of demoralization of an enemy occurred with the atomic bomb attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. At the time, the Japanese high command showed no signs of leaving the war, although the American military was bringing the fight very close to home and threatening the military center of the Japanese Empire. Any desire by the Japanese military to continue the war was crushed, however, with the release of the atomic bombs in 1945. These attacks, unprecedented in world history, the mere sight of the mushroom cloud, the impact on the people in the bomb's epicenter, so demoralized the foe that surrender suddenly became a palpable object. Demoralization is not merely a tactic used by militaries. Professional athletes also make a go at demoralizing their competitors. Boxers, mixed martial artists, collegiate wrestlers, and other athletes have various tools in their arsenal designed to break the spirit of the person they are competing against. An impressive kick to the shin, a fast escape or pin, these are all ways that a competitor can be so demoralized that they lose their will to fight. Once again, this is the power of suggestion. One of the reasons why demoralization is so effective is because suggestion works insidiously. When we see an impressive display from someone else, this works magic on our minds, often in a way that we are not conscious of. A demoralized person may get weak in the knees or show other physical signs of the influence that a thought or image has had on them. Although you do not have to be careful about using demoralization unethically, when it comes to a fair fight, this is definitely a tool to have in the toolkit. Manipulation in the workplace. There are many ways that you can use manipulation in the workplace, whether as a work supervisor or as someone coming up with a company policy. Obvious examples are to use various forms of reinforcement or punishment to engender the desired action or thought in employees. That being said, we hope that you have also seen here that at least in terms of competition between companies, propaganda and demoralization are also strategies that can be used. A company can demoralize a competitor by snagging a lucrative deal with a supplier or getting a tax break. Manufacturers actively use propaganda to instill awe or fear in rivals. This is a technique that auto manufacturers frequently use to create buzz before they release a new car or truck. Auto shows are a great way to do this in the auto manufacturing world, but as an important person in your own company, you can certainly find ways to use demoralization and propaganda effectively and ethically. Chapter 4. Preparing the mind to manipulate. Manipulation will require some preparation on your part. If you think about successful manipulators, they do not jump into this game blind. We are not talking about the espionage and intelligence gathering of Sun Tzu's The Art of War. We are talking about the reality that manipulation is a skill that taps into inherent facets of the human mind. There is a reason why manipulation is considered an art of dark psychology. The easiest way to conceptualize this issue is to imagine a manipulator. At this point, you are probably a little tired of the Marquez and Rasputin. But these are easy examples to illustrate an important point. Manipulation should be used in combination with other arts to great effect, just as the two aforementioned manipulators did. Consider Rasputin. Much of the impact that Rasputin had in Russia was purely based on reputation. Sure, evidence suggests that Rasputin was somehow able to stop the hemophiliac attacks of the Tsarevich, but the Russian nobility were not suffering from hemophilia. It was Rasputin's reputation and the enhanced significance this reputation had because of Rasputin's close physical proximity to the Empress. This is what cemented his power in Russia. Women threw themselves at the mystic. Generals and members of the high nobility stooped to kiss the fingers of the peasant. What is that but skillful use of manipulation? This was manipulation both on a personal level, exerting a personal influence on another person, and also at the large group, influencing how a large group of people perceive you. Unfortunately, the reputation aspect of Rasputin's influence eventually slipped out of his hands. He found himself with a negative reputation as Russia was losing the war and the mystic became associated with the perceived misrule of the empress who was serving as regent while her husband was away. The Marquise in Les Lésions Dangereuses is a great example of preparing your mind for manipulation. The image that we get of her is of someone who wore a mask. Aside from her physical beauty, she was well-mannered, pleasant, and well-dressed. She was the sort of person that people wanted to be around, wanted to know. She exerted an impression of success, happiness, wealth, and all the beautiful things in the world, though what lie beneath might be something altogether different. If you want to be able to influence others, you can benefit greatly from having attractive qualities. Skillful manipulators are attractive even if they are not necessarily physically attractive. Perhaps they are funny, intelligent, or great conversationalists. One important way that you can prepare yourself to manipulate is by focusing on those social skills that will draw people closer to you. There are many ways that you can use this mental aspect of manipulation to exert influence on others. These are some ways that you can prepare yourself. Be a people person, the sort of person that others want to be around. Go to social gatherings and network. Enjoy the company of others, as they will be able to perceive this. Make an effort to establish and maintain friendships. Do your best not to demonstrate anger or ill will around those you want to influence positively. As a last note on this subject, when you are manipulating others positively, they will often be able to perceive the goodness of your intentions and respond to them. Sure, unethical manipulators are often able to conceal their intentions to an extreme degree. But if your goal is ethical manipulation, then you want to create a positive energy exchange between yourself and those you seek to influence. This is a mental step. For this type of manipulation, it will be necessary to clear your mind of negative thought and to send positive cues to those you hope to influence. For those of you who seek to engage in the military style of manipulation, you have a trickier game to play. These forms of manipulation can stumble into the unethical, so the mental process that you need to go through is understanding what your intentions are and that the means are merely a way to exert those positive intentions. Demoralizing a competitor may seem like a nasty thing to do, but if the end result is something beneficial, then you may have to do it. Keep that in mind as an important preparation step. Chapter 5. How to manipulate others. Human beings are a social species. We influence one another in various ways, and it is perfectly natural to do so. Perhaps when you began reading this book, you wondered why anyone would want to manipulate someone else. Manipulation is something that evil people do, isn't it? Well, as you have seen here, the answer to that question is no. Nearly everyone manipulates, and many people may not be conscious that they do. A teacher manipulates his or her students. Parents manipulate their children. Employers manipulate their employees. Wives manipulate their husbands and vice versa. This is a game that human beings play with each other, a game that rests on the fundamental ability of human beings to be open to suggestion from others. In this last chapter, we will give you the steps on how you can manipulate others. Step 1. Being clear on how you are manipulating, differentiating ethical from unethical manipulation. The first step to manipulating others is having a clear understanding of why you're doing it. We went into great detail on all the philosophical meanderings distinguishing ethical from unethical manipulation. Your goal is to manipulate ethically, that is, to influence the thoughts and actions of others for beneficial reasons. Step 2. Understand the tools in your manipulation arsenal. The next step in manipulating successfully is understanding the weapons you have at your disposal. Positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, bandwagon effect, punishment, demoralization. These are all strategies that you can use to influence others. Understanding what they are and how to use them is important. Step 3. Be attractive to other people. One of the overlooked aspects of manipulation is that a good manipulator is one that people want to be influenced by. Someone who is perceived as successful socially, friendly, warm, attractive. This is the sort of person who will be most able to influence other people because people are more likely to be suggestible from people that they are attracted to. It's not about looks alone. Just go to the internet and get a sense of how Grigory Rasputin looked whilst he was pulling the puppet strings in St. Petersburg. Step 4. Do not be pushy or overbearing. People can be turned off when they feel like the person they are dealing with is pushy, or if they get the sense that you have an ulterior motive. Technically, you do have an ulterior motive, but a good one. The idea is to come across as not wanting to influence people perhaps as much as you really do. Step 5. Prepare yourself mentally. Aside from reminding yourself why you are manipulating in the first place, it is a good idea to clear your mind of anything that might make you least effective. Remember, the idea is to influence people. Someone who is angry, distracted, or whose mind is somewhere else will often be less effective at this. Step 6. Hold your cards close to your chest. You have aces in your hand and you are ready to use them. You understand human nature and you understand how it can be used to manipulate. As you know, there are many tools that you can use to influence others. Use them carefully and with forethought. Frequently asked questions. 1. What is manipulation? The term manipulation refers to the ability to influence the thoughts and behaviors of other people. Manipulation sometimes has a connotation that some people consider negative, so the term persuasion is often used. The distinction between persuasion and manipulation is not widely agreed upon. Persuasion is a general term for the ability to influence others. Because of the connotations that manipulation has for bending the will of others against their will, or in an underhanded fashion, some people avoid using the word manipulation. In reality, manipulation falls within the normal range of human behaviors. Whether or not this represents an overall positive side of human behaviors versus some of the more negative inclinations that we as humans have is outside the scope of this book. This is an issue for the philosophers and the ethicists. What you need to take away from this book is that manipulation can be either positive or negative, ethical or unethical. Ethical manipulation in your work and home life is what you strive for. 2. Does manipulation have to be bad? Manipulation does not have to be bad. Ethical manipulation involves using that influencing ability to guide others in a direction that is positive. Think about the positive reinforcement that we use throughout our daily lives without even being conscious of it. We reward our spouses, our coworkers, and employees, our children, our pets. We do this so often that we take for granted that this is actually a form of manipulation, perhaps the most common one. There are other forms of manipulation, some of them used to negative or detrimental effect. As we stated, manipulation does not have to be negative. You have the ability to steer the actions and thoughts of others to imbue positivity into their lives or merely to align their thoughts and actions with your own. 3. What is dark psychology and why is manipulation considered to be a part of it? Dark psychology is a term that is sometimes used to refer to using an understanding of psychology to manipulate others or bend them to your will. The term dark psychology suggests that manipulation is generally used for sinister purposes by unscrupulous people. Manipulation as a tactic is considered by some part of the realm of dark psychology, which frankly has not done a lot of good for the school of thought, which posits that manipulation can be used for good. Indeed, merely referring to manipulation as a type of dark psychology suggests that manipulation is generally used for bad things. Unfortunately, there are bad people out there who use manipulation for bad things. The reality is, though, that all humans manipulate, sometimes unaware that what they are doing is manipulation. The key is gaining knowledge of ethical manipulation and understanding how you can work wonders with it. 4. Do I need to use manipulation to be successful in my careers? Once you understand what manipulation really is, encompassing tactics as simple as positive reinforcement, you will realize that you have probably already used manipulation of some kind in your career. It would almost be misguided of you to not learn more about manipulation so that you can better use it in your career and for positive effect. All supervisors and employers use some sort of manipulation, even if it takes the form of rewarding high performers with a bonus or a vacation and punishing others with probation or a visit to the supervisor's office. Technically, these are all forms of manipulation. Do you have to use manipulation in your career? Perhaps not. Are you already using it? Probably. 5. Who uses manipulation? Manipulation is put to good use by many organizations or groups that may surprise you. A good example of this is the military. One of the tasks of trainers of new recruits is to break them in. How do they do that? They do it by breaking them down mentally, teaching them how to be a part of a team or unit, rewarding them, punishing them, encoding certain behaviors of them. If you truly understand what manipulation is, then you realize that these are all forms of manipulation. Manipulation is not merely used by the military. Marketers manipulate you to convince you to buy certain products. The media manipulates, getting you to care about a story in order to get views. We are constantly being manipulated, so the short answer is that everyone uses manipulation. 6. Is positive reinforcement the only ethical form of manipulation? Positive reinforcement is perhaps the most obvious form of manipulation, but it is not the only one. Any tactic that taps into the suggestibility of human beings or the ability of human beings to change their behavior based on some trigger uses a form of manipulation. A system of punishments is a type of manipulation. It's designed to discourage a particular behavior. What is referred to as the bandwagon effect, where you suggest to people that everyone is engaging in a behavior, that is another form of manipulation. Manipulation hinges on the idea of suggestibility, that human beings are suggestible to be influenced by others by virtue of being primates. Therefore, positive reinforcement as a means of influencing others is just one of many forms of manipulation, but as it is not the only way to influence people, it is not alone. 7. How do I know when I am using manipulation unethically? Part of becoming educated in manipulation is understanding when you are manipulating others ethically versus unethically. Now, philosophers of the age of reason would argue that someone who is good would instantly know when they might be influencing others in a negative way, and they would stop. Human beings, as being naturally good, would tend to naturally prevent themselves from influencing others to do things that are bad, right? Well, this was indirectly a topic that philosophers racked their brains about. The fact that so much manipulation happens and so much has a negative goal suggests that maybe human beings aren't so good after all. Or conversely, that human beings are being themselves influenced by society to do things that are bad. In a manner of speaking, humans, naturally susceptible to being manipulated, are being manipulated to do bad. Whatever your take is on the question, and regardless of whether or not you can tell when you are being unethical and what that says about you, you can generally follow some guidelines to be able to tell if you are engaging in unethical manipulation. If the result of your manipulation leads to harm of one or more people, whether physical or otherwise, then you are demonstrating unethical manipulation. Also, if your intentions are to do harm, then that is a good indication that you are using unethical manipulation. 8. Wouldn't it be better to just call ethical manipulation persuasion and just cut out all of the negative connotation? It might be easier for the proponents of dark psychology or anyone else who is an advocate of manipulation to simply call it persuasion instead. The issue of the difference between the two is rather thin. If it helps you to think of manipulation as persuasion, if that helps to ease your conscience a little, then go right ahead and call it persuasion. One of the advantages of being honest and calling it manipulation, however, is that it allows you to fully understand the capabilities of this art and use it to impact others positively. 9. Why does manipulation work? Manipulation works because we are primates, plain and simple. Out of all the groups within the animal kingdom, primates are arguably the best learners, and humans are a sterling example of that. What makes humans such great learners? The human brain can be imprinted with images and ideas like other animals, but we particularly are good at imprinting complex behaviors. In short, we are suggestible to information that we receive from others. This may seem like a problem, but it really is what allows humans to be, well, human. We can learn language and complex motor skills and engage in all manner of complex behaviors. Because our brain is highly suggestible to information from others, unethical manipulators can use this human tendency to wreak harm, but if you are wise and you are good, you can use this human gift to influence others in a positive, beneficial way. 10. Why is unethical manipulation bad? Aside from making the world a crappy place to live in, unethical manipulation is a characteristic of narcissistic individuals who behave without any regard to others, their thoughts, their feelings, their pains, or their outcomes. Unfortunately, as humans, we do have this narcissistic strain in us, and some argue that the ability to behave with complete absence of narcissism in an altruistic way is what makes us human. You do not want to utilize unethical manipulation because you are not a narcissist. You understand that we all must live in this world together and that we are all interconnected. A world where everyone is behaving narcissistically will soon become a hell for all of us. No one wants to live in a hell. We have been gifted with this wonderful planet full of wondrous things. Our time here is short. By using ethical manipulation to make the world a better place, we can make better use of the brief time we have on this rock we call Earth. Conclusion. Congratulations on reaching the end of Mastering Manipulation, where you learn the skills you need to use the arts of dark psychology to manipulate those in your life ethically. We introduced you gradually to the art of ethical manipulation with the goal of preparing you to use those skills to reach your full potential. We helped you navigate through the murky waters that surround manipulation so that you can understand what it really is, nothing more than a tool that can permit you to effectively influence the thoughts and actions of others. Manipulation is an essential tool to have in your arsenal to achieve success in business, relationships, and in your social life. As you have seen in this book, in spite of all of the connotations that some people may have surrounding the term, manipulation is a tactic that most people use. You may not even realize that you are using it too. All manipulation does is tap into natural tendencies of the human psyche. This is why manipulation is often closely associated with the term dark psychology. This term implies that manipulation is used in ways sinister and dark, but it is perhaps a misappellation. Although the weapons of dark psychology can be used for ill, they do not have to be. Indeed, anyone who truly understands the term manipulation will realize that humans engage in this practice naturally. As you saw in this book, even when you reward your child or your pet with a treat, you are engaging in some form of manipulation. As you saw in this book, a type of manipulation that people often overlook is the bandwagon effect. Many of you may recognize that a common application of the bandwagon effect in today's world of social media and social influencing is the concept of a weaponized community. If you are an entrepreneur or a person active in marketing, a weaponized community allows you to influence the thoughts and behavior patterns of a group. You can create a band of loyal supporters who will follow you and support your brand. As we stressed, when your message and intentions are good, you will find that your supporters will follow you and, hey, you deserve to be followed. We took you through each step of learning manipulation logically. We began by introducing you to the important concept of ethical manipulation. This not only helped you gain a deeper understanding of manipulation and the related concept of persuasion, but it also introduced you to the different ways that you can influence others. Although readers' minds often jump to reinforcement as the means by which we influence others for good, there are a host of ways that we can impact the actions and thoughts of others, ways that you were able to familiarize yourself with here. In the second chapter, we introduced you to negative manipulation, how this powerful art can be used to influence others in a way detrimental. In reality, one of the take-home points was that negative manipulation is not only detrimental to others, but to you. We are all connected in this planet that we call Earth, and whenever we choose to do things to others that may harm them, we run the risk that the same may one day be done to us. Some might even argue that we increase that risk. You were given examples of negative manipulation so that you would know how to avoid it. Just another way of helping to guide you to use your newfound powers for good. In the third chapter, we exposed you to how manipulation is used ethically quite commonly, including by the military. One of the roles of the important few entrusted with the task of training new recruits is to guide them on the road to being the best soldiers they can be so that they can serve their country. How do they do that? Well, sometimes they do it through punishment, a type of manipulation, but they often use reinforcement, cues, and other forms of manipulation that were discussed in this book. These are all tools for you to have in your arsenal as you proceed forward from here. Before you begin to influence others, your mind must be properly prepared. You need to be conscious of your thoughts, your intentions, even where your body is and how it looks in space and time. An easy way to influence others is through facial cues or gestures. Influencing others effectively means always being conscious of all of these aspects of yourself. In the fourth chapter, you learned how to prepare your mind and your body for all of the work and persuasion that you have ahead of you. Finally, it was time to put all that you learned to work. You have to think about how you can manipulate those around to their and your benefit. Again, this means having a sense of who you are, but it also means having a deep sense of how human beings think and work. We are primates and animals after all, and there are certain psychological traits that we all share. These are the traits that are tapped into by dark psychology, and the goal of reading this book was understanding these qualities and learning how to make the most of them. No book on manipulation would be successful if it did not break down to you how you can use your skills in the art in your regular life. By the end of the book, you probably had already begun to think about how you could influence the thoughts and deeds of the people around you. You should have been thinking that way because, after all, the purpose of this book was to help you. If you needed a little more of a guide of how you could put your manipulative skills to work, The last chapter did just that. We broke down simply the steps that you can take to effectively integrate ethical manipulation into your life. Now that you have completed the book, the next step is to apply what you have learned. This was not a book that you downloaded merely for your enjoyment. You can influence people around you in positive ways, and now you are ready to do it. Think about it this way. There are already people around you manipulating you because, frankly, that's what human beings do. Now you are ready to engage in this dance yourself. With the knowledge that you have gained here, you can do this dance well and ethically. Free bonus. If you're new to my work, then you're in for a surprise because I always strive to over-deliver to my readers and listeners. I've put together a great PDF giving you insight into a ton of practical persuasion strategies. While it's geared towards use in the world of business, its basics are in sales, and there are elements of sales in every part of life, so don't feel like you can't benefit from it if you're not in the business. Visit tinyurl.com/persuasion download to get access now. Make sure to take a moment to leave a review if you found any value in this book. Preview chapter. I also like to give readers a sneak peek into some of my other books to see if they might be interested, so please enjoy the following excerpt from my book, Building a Strong Mind, a Guide to Superior Emotional Intelligence and Avoiding Manipulation. Have you ever felt like you were being taken advantage of? You think back about a situation and realize that you were shortchanged or duped and you do not understand how? You probably were a victim of manipulation and did not realize it at the time. Manipulators are very subtle in how they coerce and influence a person to do things. They make you feel like you had no choice or you made the best choice, though in your own private time you question the choices you have made. There are many people that go about life without knowing if they are being manipulated or even what is manipulation and what it does to their lives. Manipulation can also be termed as emotional blackmail. This is where a manipulator will use their position of authority to control you and use you for their personal gain. In this first section of the book, we will look at what manipulation is and what it is not. You will be able to understand when manipulation is used for good and when it is used for destruction. Manipulation is everywhere you look. If you go to a store to buy something like a shoe or dress, the salesperson is going to use their manipulation skills to convince you to buy something and in many cases spend beyond your budget. Sometimes they use these skills to influence your mind by preying on your weaknesses, so you end up buying what you did not need in order to fill your emotional need for feeling good about yourself, but in true essence, they are the ones that have benefited from the transaction. Manipulation can also be found in the workplace. A colleague can bully you emotionally or use your weaknesses to coerce them to do things for them. Manipulation can be between peers or workmates, between employers and employees, while even a junior employee can be able to manipulate their boss. In normal relationships like family and friends, manipulation is also found. In marriages, it is common and has been one of the leading causes of divorces in society. In schools, you find some students that are bullies and others are being bullied. This is a case of a manipulator and their victim. Many victims of manipulation do not realize when they are being manipulated or do not know how to identify a manipulator in their lives and avoid them. In this section of the book, we discuss how to identify a manipulator before they manipulate you and how to identify those already in your life. You will also learn the various ways a manipulator is able to spot a weakness in their victim and how they use it to their advantage and destruction of the victim. This is a crucial part of the book because without knowing what to look out for, you will not be able to prevent it or stop it from happening. Now take some time, go through this book, and you will be shocked at the discoveries you make, but at the same time, You will be able to move forward and correct what is not right in your life.